Hey, Jay here. Let's make some ambient music. So if you don't know me, my name is Jay Hosking. I make music with hardware synthesizers, sequencers, drum machines, effects, groove boxes, that sort of thing. I don't normally do this talking head business. I'm more of a performance guy, so bear with me. I get a lot of questions, but most of all I get questions about how I make music, and especially how I make ambient music. So what I thought I'd do briefly today is walk through the process of making an ambient piece from the very beginning to the very end. There are lots of ways to do this, so I'll talk about what ambient music is or isn't. Mainly I'm going to talk about how I don't care about the rules. Then I'll show you a bunch of other potential setups for making ambient music, and then finally focus on one particular setup. Over this last year I've made a couple of albums of ambient music using a small eurorack skiff. The eurorack skiff is sample based and has a bunch of effects and is capable of these very long album length performances. So I'm really going to focus there on how I create the material that I can finally perform, really moving from the ideas and the thoughts all the way to the final piece of music. So let's go. So I thought we better start by very briefly talking about what ambient music is. I'm not going to spend too much time here. Maybe I'll do another video about this in the future. There is a formal definition of ambient music. Really, the idea is that it's music that fades into the background, that doesn't draw your attention. In psychological terms, we would say it's not particularly salient. You're able to live your life without it bursting or breaking into your attention too much. When I think of the strictest forms of ambient music, I think of things like Eric Satie's furniture music, or I think of Basinski's disintegration tapes, these things that kind of slip almost out of your conscious awareness entirely and color your experience while also not requiring too much of your conscious explicit attention at the same time. So yeah, that's the formal definition, but in actuality, the music I make in many cases doesn't satisfy those criteria. It either has physical properties like brightness or loudness or volume changes that draw the attention, or it has an emotional quality that draws the attention and pulls you away from whatever you're doing in your life. I write the word ambient on there because that's the closest thing it is. Sometimes I also use the term cinematic because people recognize that what that means is soundtrack music, the soundtrack of your life, even if it's not a soundtrack for a movie or a TV show or a video game or something. But you know what? I don't worry about it that much, and I don't think you should worry about it either. I think getting really hung up on genre is a waste of perfectly good energy. Now, what are the components of really good ambient music? The honest answer is anything. Great ambient music has been made with tape reels and fragments. It's been made with pianos. It's been made with synthesizers and so on. So just use what you really like. I'm going to show you two approaches. The first one, that's in the margins of this video, has to do with three components: a synthesizer, a sequencer, and a time-based effect. So for synthesizers, I tend to really like subtractive synthesis, which is when you have a filter that is removing that high frequency content, right? That leaves you with a warmer sound. Not only that, but I tend to like slower envelopes, so a slower attack or rise in the sound, a sort of smoother or longer decay. So these aren't plucky sounds, these are what we might call a pad. A polyphonic instrument tends to work a little bit better than monophonic, but you can get away with great monophonic performances in ambient music as well. The second part is you got to sequence it. To sequence it, you can of course use these things, your fingers, so you can play a keyboard. For many of us, we love making music, but we're not necessarily the best keyboard players, so another approach is to use a sequencer. Some synthesizers have a sequencer on board, like the Korg Volca or something like that. You could also have a built-in sequencer in a number of hardware controllers, like the Arturia Keystep. And then, of course, you can just use a completely separate sequencer, like the Oxy One, or even the sequencer that's baked into an Electron Digitact or something like that, right? And third, you need some sort of time-based effect, like delay or probably reverb. Reverb is my go-to. What the time-based effect really does is, again, smear out the sound. It's interesting because reverb and delay can both catch certain aspects of the sound and amplify them or emphasize them, make them sort of emerge in a way that you don't normally feel. They provide a sense of space and grandeur and depth that you just can't get when an instrument is fully dry. The other approach is sample-based, and that's what I'll be focusing on today. I like a sample-based approach because it allows me to take advantage of some really cool tools I have in my computer that I don't normally get to use in performance. So you create these existing sound sources, and then through a sampler we'll play the sound sources and then perform them using a variety of filters and effects and all sorts of other things, mixing and so on. And so let's start that process. The very first thing we need to do is make an existing sample, make a starting point. And to do that, I really just like to noodle around in the margins of my life. I have a pretty busy life, so in between all that busyness, I like to make little fragments of music. So to begin with, I've been exploring this piano plugin called Strands. I mean, piano's maybe not the right way to put it. You play in whole notes, just plonk on the keyboard, and what it spits back to you is this very rhythmic, arpeggiated, very stereo-panned piano sound. Each of the notes is played back at different rhythms, in different parts of the stereo field, and even will be played back at different octaves, which gives you a quite dynamic and quite unpredictable kind of sound. I really like it a lot. Once I had the piano part, I thought I'd add some strings. Piano and strings are like chocolate and peanut butter. They just go together really, really well. So to make these strings, I used a plugin called Cells. I really like Cells, not only because it sounds really good, but there's an element of unpredictability baked into it. You play it at slightly different volumes, and you get these different articulations. It'll even read what key you're in and start to create this little fluctuation in the sounds that you're making. And so it's got this really dynamic, really rich performance that I just couldn't easily reproduce by playing strings on a keyboard. After I had piano and strings, I thought I need something in the lower register. First I tried double bass, and that was pretty cool. I also realized that a synthesizer might fill in the bottom end really well, so I used one of my very favorite software synthesizers, which is the Legend, and the Legend did a really great job of filling in the lower end. This approach worked so well for me that I actually sketched out 4 different song ideas. The first one of which I liked so much just on its own that it's become the basis of a soundtrack I'm making for a short film. I'll be maybe putting that up on my channel sometime in the future. The other 3 were all quite good, and I'm still, as of this recording, not sure which one I'm gonna use for the live performance. So once we had these sketches, these musical ideas, the next step is to get them ready and prepare them for the eurorack skiff. To do that, we really rely on pulse stretch. If you've never heard of pulse stretch before, it's this completely free program that allows you to independently control the time stretching and the pitch of your audio. I know a lot of things can do this these days, but pulse stretch really produces these beautiful results. What I usually do is I stretch the time by like somewhere between 5 and 8 times slower than usual. In this case, I made them all 5 times slower than they were to begin with. And then I turn down the pitch until I get something that's just inherently pleasing to me, which in this case was somewhere around half an octave lower. And that meant I went from something that sounded like this something that sounded like this. So now I've gone from having these 3 pieces that were about 1.5 minutes each to these pieces that are about 8.5 minutes long and sound really, really beautiful in and of themselves. The final step is to actually start performing them. So that's where I am today. I started with 3 musical sketches that were each about 1.5 minutes long. Now I've got these 3 samples that are each over 8 minutes long. I'm going to load them all onto the eurorack skiff, probably choose one of them, and then perform it using the setup. Okay, so here's the eurorack setup. I thought I'd talk about it first before we patch everything in. Over here is the sampler. This is what's going to be playing the samples that we just created. This is also a sample player, but what's interesting about it is that it will play all sorts of weird old found sounds. So it's got a bunch of preset recordings on it, nothing that I created, something that came with the device itself. And it's everything from, I don't know, old recordings of the subway or city streets to radio programs, to interviews, to number stations where those numbers are being read off in a mysterious kind of way. I really, really like this. What I like about it is that I don't have control over it. I can set the station, whether we're listening to the number towers or an interview or whatever else, but it's just kind of always rolling in the background. And that means that when I turn up the volume, for this found sound device, I don't know what I'm going to get. And that can lead to these really beautiful, synergistic, surprising moments where there's a really nice match between the recording, this old recording, and whatever's coming out of the sampler over here musically. They often mix together. I don't use this too much because I'd find it's too distracting or would grab attention too much, but a little bit of this can go a really long way. Next here is a filter. This filter's great. It has a low-pass filter here to get rid of the high frequencies, a high-pass filter to get rid of the low frequencies, and together you really have control over the dynamics. So even if the original sample isn't in a quiet section, you can use this filter to really bring it down into a quiet section. Resonance is really nice on it because the model I'm using is based on the old Korg MS-20, which has a lot of personality to it. Next one over here is a granular effects and granular synthesizer. Grabs little audio snippets and plays them back forwards or backwards in higher density, lower density. You can pitch them up and down so they can be really low or really high. You can feed it back into itself so it sort of spirals off into infinity with these sounds. Lots of cool stuff here, and it's got an interesting reverb here over in the corner for some extra reverb if I need it. This device here is a dedicated reverb unit. It's a really weird one. It sounds weird. It has a lot of good control and has a lot of unique personality. Different algorithms for distortion versus shimmer versus a cleaner one. You can move it all the way from very delay style sounds all the way up into very clearly reverby sounds. Anyway, it's really nice to play. One of the few reverbs I really like playing. These two over here are more utilities. I don't know if I'll be using them or not, but I'm going to describe them now because I use them in the original recordings, those longer albums. This one here is a compressor and a limiter that really allows for some color and saturation and really dynamics control. Again, I find that good ambient will have kind of more even dynamics and not pop too much in terms of the attention. This thing here is awesome. This is a recording device, and you might be like, what's the big deal? But having a recording device baked right into the case means I don't have to carry around a separate recorder. It means I don't have to plug it into a mixer or an audio interface or a computer or whatever else. I can just plug this whole chain directly into here and be recording the overall performance right in the case, which is super handy. 2 mixers up here used to mix the different sounds together. This VCA I probably won't even be touching, but maybe I'll end up using it, who knows. And then this device over here is a performance device that when you press on it allows you to sort of nicely control any of the parameters along here. I'm not sure what I'll plug it into yet. We also have a couple of mults up here that let you split signals and send them in different pathways. I don't know if I'll use that or not, but we'll see. Yeah, so now what we're going to do is patch the whole thing in. All right, now's the time when I need to stop talking and start to explore. So let's see if we can get a final performance. Okay, so there it is, an ambient song, all the way from its initial conception to its final performance. Again, you don't have to use Eurorack. I could have used any sample-based device plus some effects that I like. Alternatively, you could just take a completely different route, use some synthesizers that you're fond of, plus some time-based effects like reverb. It really doesn't matter. Ultimately, remember that the rules can be a helpful guideline, but to throw out those rules whenever they're interfering with you making something that's really meaningful to you. Yeah, so I hope this video has been fun or useful or inspiring. Take care. Thanks for your time. I'll see you soon.